morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Please try to get seated as soon as you can. We're hoping to start as soon as possible. I know last night was a late night for most of you, so understandable. We built in a few minutes just to accommodate that eventuality. But please help me get the session moving. While we're waiting, what you will see today in this session is actually structures and concepts that are and have become very hot topics, and they are mentioned and used and discussed not just in the development context, but across all economies. These are structures for managing digital identity credentials. You've heard many countries mention them, and we would like to delve into them to see how these structures can complement traditional and classical identity systems that we've been hearing about, especially on the first day. So the idea is, can we take these new structures and build them on top of what we already have to create a transition towards a digital twin of the national identity or a digital twin of a functional identity that you already have in place. So I've asked the panelists to be very, very concrete in terms of giving you knowledge that you can use. Obviously, this is knowledge you can trust because these are thought leaders, practitioners, individuals that we vetted, we worked with, and the whole world knows their credibility. So the issue is, can this knowledge be used? So the way we're going to run the session this morning, we're going to have 3 segments. Each segment is going to be about 30 minutes. It will be run consecutively, but the entire panel will be on the board, on the stage with me. And what we will do is Slido will be on, so please go back to the event guide at the end and scan the Slido QR code so you can ask questions. So what we intend to do is we will take questions as we go along, so ask them as they happen. So during the segments, segment 1, 2, and 3, I'll try to accommodate as many questions as I can. And also, please vote on these questions. So like right now, I'd like to invite the panelists to join me to the stage. So I'll invite one by one. First, Adam Cooper. He's the technical consultant to the European Commission. Please welcome Adam Cooper. Ramesh NARAYANAN, CTO of MOSIP. Adam, thank you for being with us. Thank you. Ramesh, CTO of MOSIP. Ramesh, thank you. Thank you for being with us. Michael McCASKILL, he's the Director of Identity Management, American Association of Motor Vehicle Administration, AAMVA, in North America. Hi, Mike. Loffie JORDAAN, Business Solutions Architect from AAMVA. Loffie, welcome. Thank you for being with us. Catherine NABBALA, who is the Head of Product Identity Verification and Global Business Development, Finema, the Health Pass in Thailand. Catherine. Thank you. Arnand Acharya, who's the Project Manager for Bhutan National Digital Identity Scheme. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. and Damian Glover, Senior Director, Communications, Decentralized Identity Foundation, DIF. Thank you, Damian. So, you could see this is a list of illustrious thought leaders and practitioners, so please enjoy this session. This is going to be very, very exciting. The first segment, which will start right away, now that I see the room is filling up, is going to be on digital wallets, maximizing impact of digital identity. But before we start that, I'm being reminded that there are headsets that are missing. So please leave the headsets on the seats as you exit the room. So there's about 33 headsets that are missing, so they're looking for them and they're sending me a message saying, please remind you to leave the headsets on the chair. So I apologize for that interruption, and without any further delay, I will ask Adam Cooper to the stage. Adam.
Thank you, Joseph. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk to you this morning about the European digital identity and the European digital identity wallets. Hopefully give you an overview of the work that's been done in the European Union to produce these wallets over the last few years and how it's coming to fruition right now, but also how you can learn from that, and as Joseph said, maybe take some of this and take it to your own countries and think about how you might be able to use this to implement your own digital identity solutions. So first of all, what do I mean when I say European digital identity? You're probably aware that most of the European, well, all of the European member states already have ID schemes. Many of them have ID cards. Not all, but the majority. So why do we need a European digital identity? Well, we started off 10 years ago now with a regulation called the EIDAS that some of you may have heard of, which created an interoperability framework for all of the member states so that if I had a Belgian ID or a German ID, I could use it in Sweden or Luxembourg or wherever I was in the Union. Why? Because we have freedom of movement in the EU. I'm able to live and work wherever I want if I'm a European citizen. And this was created to allow us to do the same with identity so it could follow people around. This was 10 years ago, though. This was before we were thinking about digital wallets and decentralized world. Things have moved on since then, and we've updated the legislation recently. Only a few weeks ago, this was passed as a new law. It's now called the European Digital Identity Framework, but it's essentially based on the same existing law about mutual recognition of identity across the member states. But it brings into the legislation the latest ideas about decentralized identity and creates the concept of a single identity that can be used across the whole of Europe based on national identity as its root. So it complements everything that already exists. So if I'm a German citizen and I have a German ID card, that doesn't go away. That's still valid and still very powerful. But on top of that, we can use that as the basis for me to have a European identity that's digital, the digital twin, as Joseph was talking about, that can be used ubiquitously across Europe. And that's exactly what this does. The regulation talks about two key ideas, really. One, that digital ID, but also the digital ID wallet, which is a means of using that digital ID, not just to prove who individuals are across the different member states and their partners, but also to allow them to hold high-trust credentials that have other information about them that allow us to create really rich transactions that can be used in the public and private sector based on trusted data. And that is then coalesced around the individual in that decentralized world. And it defines the wallet, as I said, not just as somewhere to hold these credentials, but once you are onboarded to the wallet and you have within it what we call the person identification data, PID, which is a high-trust credential that comes from your member state, from your country. So if I'm Belgian, it comes from Belgium. Once that is onboarded into the wallet, that is seen as being an identification means in its own right. I can now use that in Germany, but also across the whole Union. And the principles behind the wallet are that they should be freely available to anyone. any EU citizen or resident even should be able to get hold of one of these wallets. They're issued by member states. Unlike in the first regulation, where it was not mandatory for European member states to actually have an electronic ID that was registered for cross-border use, in this case, it's mandatory for every member state to provide its citizens and its residents with the option of having one of these digital wallets and an identification means. Why? Because we want it to be widely used. We see that it's a key element of the digital economy in Europe, but also it provides citizens and residents with the ability to have access to these much richer services across a much wider range of areas. And we wanted it to be controlled by citizens. It's very, very important that we make sure that citizens are able to make use of their data, but also have their privacy protected and that they can express that data where and when they wish to and carry it with them. Some of this has followed the needs that we've experienced in going through the last 10 years or more of actually building identity systems across Europe. This is based on lots of learning, which you should take into account. We've seen changes in consumer use, smartphones becoming more prevalent, digital wallets becoming more accepted. But also, because we've had the experience of trying to work with cross-border transactions before and push the use of digital identity, we've learned what works and what doesn't work with digital identity as well. So all of this has been built into the regulation as well. Interestingly, for the first time, we are legislating in a very different way. This just a very high-level timeline of what's happening in the EU. The regulation has been published very recently, but we don't stop there. At the same time as writing that legislation, we have also been developing a reference wallet, which I will show you is a completely open source wallet that follows the architecture reference framework, which defines the standards and the specifications for how these wallets should work. That's already been built. But we are now continuing on with finishing off the legislation whilst we actually go out and test this. This is a little bit scary for legislators, but it's good because it provides lots of positive feedback into the architecture and the actual legislation that will be finalized in a year or so's time. So it's a very exciting time in Europe, and there are 4 large-scale pilots which I will describe shortly, which have a huge range of use across the EU. There are 2 important things that are happening at the moment. One is the Architecture Reference Framework, or the ARF as it's referred to, and the other one is the Implementing Acts. The reference framework defines the standards. It's a living document. The first 2 versions of that were completed recently, but it continues to be developed. Why? Because we're still learning about some of these things. Also, because we're still doing some standards development work. It defines, though, at the moment, the standards that have been used to create the reference framework and the reference wallet that I mentioned earlier, that is actually out there now and is on GitHub for any of you to access if you wish. The ARF itself is also being developed in the open. It's fully available for any of you to reference if you wish to, including lots of ancillary data and documentation that provides guidance for how these things are to be implemented. For example, there are rule books about the different credentials and how they should be created and used. All of this is online and available to you now if you wish to reference this. Exactly the same for the source code of the reference wallet. Why have we done this? Partly because we want to help member states to implement. We want to make sure that everybody is able to start work immediately. But also we have the large-scale pilots that are testing this right now. And they need a wallet to be able to implement the standards so that we can start working with real users and creating real transactions immediately. Which leads me on to the pilots themselves. There are 4 large-scale pilots currently running, and they cover different domains and different sectors. But importantly, we have over 250 companies and public authorities involved in this, covering 28 different countries. I mean, this is a significant amount of testing, covering everything from health credentials through to travel documents, payments, all kinds of different use cases, education. so that we can not only test the way that these wallets are used by individuals and businesses, but also we can start to build those richer transactions that this kind of technology enables. One example of this is the EWC pilot, and you can see just from the map there the coverage that this has. There is even some activity in my own country, despite not being a member state. We are still involved on the periphery. But you can see the reach we have right across the EU. Even working with Ukraine as a third country, one of the things that's important about the work that's happening at the moment in the EU is the EU is now looking externally for how identity can be used cross-border, not just within the Union itself, but with its partners overseas. And I think this is quite significant. One of the really important things that this kind of technology enables is for us to actually hold as citizens trusted data about ourselves that we can use for entitlement, that we can use for access to services, that make it easier and safer for us to get what we need from government and the private sector services. It's incredibly important that we do this. And the regulation embodies different types of credentials and how they can be used. Because identity simply is not enough. Knowing that it's Adam is fine, but how do you know that Adam is able to view his particular health record, that he's actually able to take this benefit from the government because of his circumstances? These are the rich transactions that we need to satisfy, and we need to do that with trusted data. The architecture itself has tried to be, as much as possible, very standards-based. We have adopted OpenID for verifiable credential issuance and presentation, for example. Why? Because it gives us the most flexible, most accepted way of doing this for digital wallets. We also recognize, though, that we need to support other things like mobile driving license, so it fully supports the ISO standards as well. But issuance is through OpenID for verifiable credentials. The wallet itself is able to hold different types of credential because it is actually a multi-purpose wallet. One of the things I haven't mentioned is that beyond carrying my identity and my trusted data, it has some other functions as well, because we wanted to push forward with payments, for example, in the EU. I'm not going to talk about that today because I only have a short amount of time and we're focusing on identity, but it has that capability. It also has the capability to be used as an electronic signature device for high-trust electronic signatures. Because I have a high-trust identity in the wallet, we also wanted to enable citizens to sign documents and sign transactions electronically at a very high level of trust, because that's also important in some transactions. Roughly speaking, there are two different types of attributes, if you like, that are held within the wallets. And they have the name electronic attestations of attributes, which is, in many ways, a very fancy way of describing what most of us would call a verifiable credential. It's an attribute with proof. And there are two versions of those. The very high-level trust attributes, which are qualified electronic attestations of attributes, and general trusted attributes, which are EAAs. They follow a very similar pattern. The only slight difference is that the high-trust electronic attestations of attributes must have some additional requirements placed upon them, similar to those placed upon electronic signatures in the European Union as well. For example, we must, at a high level of trust, verify that you are who you claim to be when we issue you one of these credentials. Luckily, the architecture of the wallet includes your PID, your identity credential, which is always at a high level of trust. And that enables you to then gain access to these high trust attributes as well. There is a lot of elements in the regulation that make sure these are very tightly managed as well. There's a lot of supervision that goes on behind the scenes. I won't go into the depth of that today, but It comes from a lot of work that we did in the earlier versions of EIDAS around trust service providers. And it's very well documented in there how supervision should work and how these things should be assessed before they're allowed to operate. We also recognize, though, that there are some other attributes that are not necessarily at that very high level of trust and may come from other sources. These are electronic attestations of attributes. They still have an electronic signature associated with them for trust, but they may not be necessarily at the very highest levels. But we accept that they still exist and they're still very useful. So what about beyond the EU? The EU is doing all this work. How is that relevant, perhaps, to everybody here? Well, one interesting thing that's emerged in the last few weeks is that there are MOUs in place now between the USA and Japan for increased work on identity mapping and identifying how they can interoperate identity, but also use cases. And I know there is a push to do this with other countries from our EU colleagues. But how would you take what you have now to be something similar to this, or to learn from this? What the EU has done is take, as I mentioned earlier, the existing national ID systems, national ID cards, national registers, population registers, and has used those as the root of trust to onboard and create, as Joseph described earlier, this digital twin, which is the European digital identity. There is a clear onboarding process that's described in the reference framework. You're free to look at. We utilize open standards to be able to do this, like OpenID for verifiable credential issuance and the W3C data model for verifiable credentials. This is a good example of how we are pushing forward with these standards and actually building these wallets and testing them in the wild. And I would implore you to look at what work is being done and learn from that. Very briefly, I know I'm running out of time. I just want to emphasize that I think we're at a real axis point in our digital history with the way that wallets are being adopted and the way that the European Commission, the European Union are pushing forward very fast and very hard and investing very strongly in making these things real. It's a catalyst for development of many of these standards and is pushing forward the work that my colleagues in the OpenID Foundation and others are actually doing to produce these standards and make them real. And it's very gratifying to see that hard work come into fruition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. We will continue. We'll take questions via Slido at the end of this segment, but let's continue with the open source digital wallet, INJI, with Ramesh. Ramesh, please. Thank you for staying on time.
Good morning. I'm Ramesh. I work for a university, IIIT Bangalore, where we are building open source digital public goods, some of which you have probably heard about and some of which are in the works. We have been focusing on ID-led transformation, and as part of this journey, we started with ID lifecycle management, and now we are focusing a lot on ID usage, and wallets are a big part of how ID is used. We have always been driven by customer requirements. Our engagement with various countries across the globe, building these GPGs and offering them and implementing them, has driven our backlog of work, and a lot of our requirements are informed by this process. And in this, we have discovered numerous use cases. And we have some of them really exciting and transformative. We can see how countries are looking at their digital landscape and how transformation is fueled. And what's really exciting is that the wallet and credentials are bang in the middle of this transformation exercise. Why is it so exciting? If you look at it, almost all kind of service delivery interactions involve exchange of some data, right? And a lot of times this data has to be something that we can trust. Without trust in this data, these transactions don't happen. That's how it's in real life, and that's how it's going to be in digital life. Real life has the advantage that we are in person, maybe we are dealing with people with whom we can establish trust, but in a digital world where we are remote, we start from a position where the trust is absent. So in all these interactions, when we need to deal with information which needs to be validated, it increases the complexity of service delivery. It adds challenges to it. How can we solve this challenge? Right? That's where credentials actually play a role. Let's take a simple case. So for example, I'll take a recent example. For coming here to South Africa, I had to apply for a visa. So as part of my visa application, I needed to produce a lot of data. I had to prove who I am. Do I have sufficient money with me to cover the cost of the travel here? Do I have a return ticket? Right? That kind of shows them that my intent is to actually visit for a short duration and return. So a lot of data had to be presented. Some of this data I had to scan, print out and then scan and upload it as a PDF and make it available. And when I present this piece of paper, there's a lot of work, I'm sure, going on at the Department of Home Affairs here to see whether that is genuine data, has that document been tampered with, right? Can they trust that data? Is the bank statement from a known bank? Lots of questions are there. Right? That's why complex processes, a lot of people are involved in this. So when we start this transaction, the Department of Home Affairs would have started at a point where their risk is high and their trust is low, but every document that they verify and validate, the trust goes up, the comfort goes up. And finally, when they are comfortable enough, they issue a visa and I can travel and come here. Right? So this is the kind of interaction that happens whether it's a bank loan or when you're applying for a social benefit or even when you're trying to get into a job, there are background checks. When you're trying to get into a university for a college course, they check a lot of things. So these are the typical kind of transactions, and credentials can help us move through these steps much more faster, much more efficiently than a paper-based process. How is that? So if you look at how typically a credentials-based solution works, it's a reflection of how the real world works. When we want substantiated data, it has to come from an authoritative source. So there are going to be a trusted set of issuers for credentials. Only credentials from these would be accepted. So today, if you want to prove your identity, people might say your national ID card is acceptable, maybe your tax ID is acceptable, maybe your passport is acceptable. So there are a set of accepted documents. If these same documents, if these same organizations which do due diligence before they issue these IDs and these certificates, if they are issuing these in a digital format as verifiable credentials, these trusted issuers become the source of this data. And when they issue this as verifiable credentials, what are they doing actually? They are attesting the data. They are signing it digitally and saying, this is data that we swear to, right? This is trustworthy data. Then as users, we can get this data and whenever we are trying to access a service, present this data. So we hold this data in the wallet. So the wallet becomes a hotbed for the interaction, right? Whenever we are accessing a service, we are going to either go to an online portal or access it using the wallet or applications. So the wallet becomes an important part of this interaction. And when we present to the service providers, they can trust this information and take decisions. And these decisions can be taken in a moment because the data is trusted, it's interpretable. All of this can be done by a program in a matter of a few seconds. Imagine the kind of time savings, cost savings that can be achieved. What does it mean? It means more budget for government department for things that they want to do, other things that they want to do. It means more time saved for end users so that they can do the other things that they are meant to do. Right? So huge benefits are there in this process. And how does all this hold up? Between the issuers, between the service providers and the users, there is a trust layer which underpins all of this. Is this a known bank which is allowed to do KYC, or is it some spurious party trying to rip you off your data? Right? As end users, we need protection, and the trust framework actually can offer us the kind of protection that we need. It also offers a lot of confidence for the service providers to lower their risk. When we are building the wallet, we had to look at what kind of features we'll support. So we started with a few user journeys, and this will get enriched over a period of time. So one thing that we support is a very straightforward thing, which is downloading these credentials from these various issuing authorities. We use open standards for this process. Adam talked about some of those that the EU is recommending. There are other parts of the world which are looking at other specifications also. So we support these specifications, and on a need basis, we can expand the number of protocols or specifications that we support. So we can download credentials from various issuing authorities. Next thing is we allow usage of these credentials in online enrollment scenarios. So it is possible for me to submit these credentials when I'm applying for something online. Let's say I'm trying to enroll into an university for a PhD course. Then they are asking me to submit my degree certificates, my identity data. All these I can submit as credentials in an online application. So we have facilities for that. There are cases where I'm trying to access services in person, in a peer-to-peer fashion. In these cases also, I can present credentials to the service provider. We have mechanisms to share this over either online share or local offline share using Bluetooth Low Energy. This means that my data can be used even if I'm disconnected from the internet or from the service provider, right? So if I have to prove my age somewhere, I can use my ID credential and prove my age without having to hit any server, even in offline disconnected environments. Of course, the recipient, the service provider, also needs to have these tools that are receiving these credentials. There are innumerous use cases that are there. So it's not just people and online systems. You can even talk to devices, IoT devices. If you are, let's say, staying at a hotel, and once you check in, they can actually give you a pass. This pass can be used for you to enter your room. Only you have access to it. You can unlock it on your mobile, and then you can get in. Same way, maybe this event next year, sir, we could have digital passes and certificates for people to get in, right? So the interaction models are with online applications, peer-to-peer, as well as with machines. But we also know that it's not just about data. We started from identity, and we have some identity-related features also built into the wallet. This includes the ability to prove who I am offline completely, right? So I can share my ID credential, or I can make a presentation. I can do even a selfie authentication to prove that I'm actually present as part of the transaction when I'm sharing my ID. This allows for offline verification of my identity. There are many flows where we have to log in into services. You start your journey online, but you can actually complete it with your wallet. So you can transition, INJI supports you to transition your login or authentication from the online website to your device. So by just scanning a QR code on the login process, you take over on your mobile, complete the authentication, and sign in. So this allows you to do your authentication or share your biometrics all on your device, which you're comfortable with, rather than in with some unknown website. Right. So these are mechanisms that we already support. One interesting thing is the mobile, especially with this authentication, allows us to prove that we are present and part of a transaction, whether we are authorizing something, whether we are collecting something, whether we are giving consent or signing a contract. All these cases, there's a way to assure that we are present. as part of these transactions. So the possibilities of how this can be used are so exciting, whether it is government departments issuing national ID cards or functional ID cards like voters ID or social protection IDs or tax IDs, or dealing with trade licenses, export licenses, or certificates like vaccine certificates, like the COVID certificate was a very popular one, or maybe the yellow fever certificate that I had to submit as part of my visa processing here. So all of these are candidates. So loads of government use cases are there. But then it doesn't stop with the government. Tons of private sector use cases are also there. I'm hearing interesting cases where people are already white labeling our wallet and using it for private sector use cases. Some interesting inputs are coming from that. All this means the wallet is going to be an integral part of the experience of users going forward. So how can you actually offer this in your environment? So in INJI, we have built tools for all the stakeholders, whether it is the issuer or the wallet for the user or tools for the verifiers. So if you want to convert your paper certificates to digital certificates, you can actually start using INJI Certify, integrate that, and start issuing credentials. At present, we support verifiable credentials, the W3C JSON LD model, but we are looking to add support for more formats as and when there is demand. The wallet itself, you can take it and white label it and launch it as your national ID wallet, or private sector players can also offer this. It could also be a departmental wallet. If you don't want to use the whole wallet, you can pick components which offer you interoperability because we have a very modular architecture, and then you can incorporate that. For people who don't have smartphones, we have a cloud wallet. The initial version of it, INJI Web, allows you to download these credentials. We have not added persistence layers there yet, but once that is there, it will be a full-fledged cloud wallet. But right now, it does allow you to access these credentials online. The verification tools can also be used correspondingly by relying parties. Why INJI? We are truly open source, open standards based, and we are working on the cutting edge using the latest architecture and incorporating best practices, doing it for you. We are well supported. You have documentation, you have community, we have training programs and teams that can help you in your exercises. And then we have great licenses which allow you to extend and brand it as your own solution and offer it. Please look us out. Our information is available here in these places, and I'm also available for, team is available for conversations offline here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramesh. Okay, so you've heard about the wallet. You've heard two perspectives about it. We are going to take 5 minutes on the clock and just answer some questions that you've asked about the wallet. The first question, I guess it would go to Adam. Adam, will non-citizens have access to wallets in Europe?
Sorry, repeat the question.
Will non-citizens have access to wallets in Europe?
Okay, so the current regulation talks about EU citizens, but also residents. It's not clear at the moment about other people who might be in the country, so non-residents. That said, I know there are negotiations going on at the moment talking about how we can use digital identity and national identity as well when placing other individuals. None of that is resolved yet, but I hope it will be shortly. All I can say is those negotiations continue.
No, Does that also apply to the second question, which says, will the EUDI eventually be interoperable with national wallets from outside EU?
Yeah, very much that is an intention. The two MOUs I mentioned at the end there between Japan and the USA are the first step towards doing that. There is also work going on working with Ukraine for obvious reasons. They have a very strong digital application which we want to integrate with. Unlike earlier versions of the legislation, as I mentioned, there is definitely a will within the Commission to actually look outside of the Union and to interoperate globally, yes.
Ramesh, there seems to be strong interest and many questions about interoperability of the wallet within Europe, outside Europe, all over the world. Where are we with the standards? It's not enough to be an open source. Are there standards, like are we going to get to an ISO standard that allows the wallets to be specified and everybody will have standards based?
I think we have a multitude of standards being developed as we speak. And the good news is they are competing with each other and trying to make it better, right? So there's loads of innovation that's happening in this. So we support standards. We can't support all standards all the time. So we start with the popular ones where there's a lot of support and interest. So for example, on the issuance side, we work with verifiable credentials, but on the consumption side, we will also support mDOC being able to accept credentials that are issued elsewhere. So yes, and wallets will have support for many of these standards. And hopefully there'll be a small set so that the code complexity and maintenance is easy.
Actually the two of you, how would you characterize the relationship between the EUDI reference specification and the INJI wallet? How do they relate to each other?
I think there's a lot of similarity, particularly in the standards world. We support exactly the same standards for the acquisition of credentials and the then presentation of credentials, which is fantastic. The European Digital Identity Wallet, as I mentioned before, is intended to do other things as well. So it goes way beyond a normal wallet, in that the intention is to also provide electronic signature capability, but also the ability to have an e-payments facility built into the wallet as well. So we're trying to build something that's a little bit more than just an identity and credential wallet. So there are differences, but for me, I believe that that's okay. What we actually need is interoperability at the standards level, so that if I have a credential in my EU wallet and Ramesh has an NG wallet, we should be able to share credentials because of the standards that exist when we are expressing credentials.
You mean we are better at the standards at the credential level than it is necessarily at the wallets at this stage?
Yes. I mean, the only missing element for me, and I've spoken about this in other forums this week, is data interoperability.
Okay.
So understanding what happens in the payload of that credential when Ramesh receives it. That's one of the missing links that we have in interoperability globally, is how does he then make sense of that trusted data I've given him?
Exactly. So actually the EUDI, you said, supports mDOC 1803-5, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
And INJI, do you support the mDOC ISO standard?
We are working on supporting the ISO standard for consumption and presentation at the wallet side. Yeah.
Okay, so in a way, the mDOC standard as a credential standard is likely to become something that gets ingested by a lot of different wallets, including national wallets. And so the interoperability at the level of the credential would be assured if everybody issues credentials with that standard.
I think, just briefly, because I'm conscious of time, that's probably true for some credentials. I don't think it will be true for all credentials.
Right.
Why? Because there are lots of credentials that exist now.
We can't support all.
And we want to make it as simple as possible for those credentials to be created as verifiable credentials, which is one of the reasons why we're open sourcing all of the work that's being done in the EU, and why INJI is open source. We don't want to push people down necessarily creating credentials in mDOC format. That said, they will exist and they will be used more, I believe, largely because it was always intended not to just be mobile driving license, but also mobile identity and mobile credentials. And maybe some colleagues will speak about that as we move on. Okay,
I'll just take one more question for this segment, but if we have more time at the end, I will open it up to the full panel. Ramesh, there is a question that came from the audience about a concern, a sustainability concern. You could see for INJI being philanthropic funded, what happens after the funding stops, and what does this mean for the countries that implemented these?
I think we are probably also going to talk about this in tomorrow's DPX session. See, we are philanthropically funded, no doubt about that, but we are driven by passion and powered by the ecosystem. We are like any other open source project. We are broad basing our participation by publishing our components, core components to the Open Wallet Foundation and inviting many more players. Already there are 3 cases that I know of where people have started using our wallet and white labeling it in the private sector. So we are sure that we are going to get a lot of contributions back. So I'm not really worried about sustainability.
It's not something to worry about then. Okay, let's stop here. We ran out of time for this segment's questions. Let's see if we can pick up some time to have a discussion across all segments. Let's continue from the MDL to the mDOC. Let's get Michael, McCASKILL, and Loffie, JORDAAN, please, to the stage, to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I am Michael McCASKILL, and I see a world where every human being on the planet has a safe, secure, privacy-respecting, interoperable identification from a true issuing authority. That is our vision. We're going to cover today where we've come from, where we're going, and where we are now in our overview of what's happening in the MDL mDOC space. Who is AAMVA? So I'm privileged to work for an organization who shares my vision of everyone having an identity across the planet. We represent 69 jurisdictions in US and Canada that are responsible for driver, vehicle, and state and provincial law enforcement. We have 150 industry partners who are also members of our organization, and we also have our federal partners. NIST was here earlier with DHS and TSAs. They are partners of ours. And then we work with other coalitions and associations that we're going to talk about a little later in our presentation. We support both domestic and international standards, and we're working on the ANSI and ISO groups to promote and prepare those standards.
So why do a digital version of your driver's license? The first reason is authentication. In the traditional case, you have a physical card, and if the security features look okay, then yes, you think this card is good. In the digital world, you get an unequivocal yes-no answer when you do authentication. Card real estate is another idea. You can only put so much information on a physical card. In the digital world, you do not have the same limitation. Data freshness is very important. Again, in the physical card case, your driver's license or ID card is typically valid for between 5 and 10 years, so the data on there could become stale. In the digital world, again, that can be much shorter and much better controlled. And another reason why digital provides better options is you don't have to share all your data. In a physical card case, when you share your driver's license, you share all the information on there, even though the relying party consuming that does not need all the information. In the digital world, that is addressed, and you can share only the data that the relying party really needs. So those are some of the ideas, or some of the reasons why a digital identity document is attractive. When AAMVA started on this journey, we consulted all our members, the issuing authorities, and we came up with a set of requirements for a digital version of a driver's license or an ID card. And as a little bit of background, in North America, your driver's license typically doubles as an identity card. So our starting point was identity and driving privileges associated with that. And so we documented this set of requirements in a requirements document that is still available on our website. The first thing we noted as a very important requirement is that a digital credential must be interoperable across jurisdictions. And so this is very important. In North America, each state or province is sovereign as far as their driver's license and ID card issuance is concerned. And we wanted those cards, the digital version, to be usable across jurisdictional boundaries. Has to work offline. There are many places where you don't have a connection, so when both the MDL holder and the reader are offline, you still have to have a successful transaction. We decided that a relying party must not have to trust the device on which your digital credential resides. So the only trust point for a relying party must be the issuing authority. And the issuing authority is public certificate. No phone home. We wanted, for privacy reasons, a solution where the issuing authority is not involved in the transaction at transaction time. We don't want the issuing authority to be able to know where and when you use your credential. We wanted to recognize that you have to be able to use it in an easy manner. It shouldn't take longer than using your physical card. And we wanted to make sure that there's no need to hand over your phone to a relying party. You need to hold your phone on you. So those are some of the requirements, and there are more. So we took that and we presented that to an ISO group that was responsible for the creation of the standard for the physical document. And so they were working on the digital document. So we presented these requirements to them. The ISO group technically is a joint group between International Organization for Standardization and the International Electrotechnical Commission. Anyway, there's this group, and they started work on this in 2014. When they started work, they also set out certain design approaches. They decided consciously to first address in-person use, knowing that over the internet presentment will follow. But that was the first case that they set out to solve. They also recognized that international interoperability is something that has to be supported. And in spite of the name of the group focusing on driver's licenses, they also decided that this, what they're working on, has to support both driver licenses and identity cards. It also had to support offline use. And so this group held many meetings over a long period of time, including here in Africa. They also conducted a number of international interoperability test events to make sure that what they're designing actually works and that the standard can be read in the same way by different entities. And so this resulted in an ISO standard that was published in 2021. In concept, what it describes is the interface between an MDL device and a reader device. You would start your transaction typically by tapping the MDL against a reader, and that sets up a secure communication channel between the reader and the MDL. The reader then sends over this secure channel a request to the holder. The holder then has the option of deciding what data to release. In this case, as the example, the holder decides to release the fact that the holder is over 21. This information gets transmitted back to the reader along with a portrait image. And so now the relying party has the data. How does the relying party know that this is true data issued by a true issuing authority? This is where the issuing authority's public key certificate comes in. The reader uses the issuing authority's public key certificate to cryptographically confirm that the data is good and was issued by the true issuing authority. How the reader gets that public key certificate is something that Mike will address in a moment. some of the salient features of the ISO specification, the 18013-5 specification. And I'm going to run through it fairly quickly. The information, I believe, will be available afterwards. It defines the concept of an mDOC, effectively the document format. So the MDL is a driver's license or identification card rendered in an mDOC format. The mDOC format can also support other types of documents, for example, vehicle registration certificates, or we've seen other implementations for pilot certificates or seafarer certificates. So it's a fairly extensible concept. Issuing authorities have choices. So we've built in quite a few choices for issuing authorities, such as you can add your own domestic data. You can decide which engagement or data transfer technologies you would like to support. And the standard was built in a way so that regardless of what your choices are, you will still have a successful technical transaction at transaction time. So it ensures that everything still works. The relying party does not have to trust the device. The relying party makes the match between the person and the data at transaction time. So the relying party takes that responsible on itself. Security was built into the design from the very start, and issuing authorities can set their own access requirements, how you access the app. The user interface part of the whole solution is outside the scope of the standard. So we just focus on the interface between the reader and the MDL. There's the concept of a mobile security object validity period, which is used to control how long the document is valid for. It does support, as we saw on the example earlier, selective data release. And this is really important about the full stack. It prescribes or defines everything you need on a technical level to have a successful transaction. This was a point made by one of the vendors yesterday, CBN, why they selected 18013-5 is because it's really complete in that sense. The standard does have two modes of operation, device retrieval and server retrieval. The issuer decides which mode it wants to use. In the device retrieval mode, the issuer is not involved in the transaction at time of transaction. The issuer doesn't know where and when you use it. For server retrieval, the issuer is involved. It does lead, the advantage of that, of the server retrieval mode is that the data is instantaneous. It's up to the issuer to decide whether the privacy concerns you have is such that you need device retrieval or server retrieval. And we did talk about the limited life of the mobile security object. We intentionally selected or describe a two-tier public key infrastructure to try to make it easy to resolve back to the root when the relying party authenticates information. We talked about how relying parties get hold of an issuer's public key certificate. The standard defines the concept of a VERIFIABLE provider, a verified issuer certificate authority list provider, which Mike will cover in more detail in a moment. Essentially, it's a list of trusted issuers of credentials, and it becomes a single point of trust for relying parties that get the full list from the VERIFIABLE provider. A point that may be especially interesting for this audience is that 18013-5 builds upon previous parts of 18013. And the previous parts have already been identified by the 25 countries participating in the TTFP, or the Tripartite Transport and Transit Facilitation Program, as their common driving license standard. And of course, these 25 countries are all African countries. So we see 18013-5 just building on that. This is a high-level overview of the broad ecosystem. You see the issuing authority, you see the MDL holder, it provisions to the holder, there's the transaction time between the holder and the verifier, and then the vehicle provider is someone that comes in, collects information from the issuing authority, specifically certificates, and makes that available to verifiers.
So where are we with adoption? So the AAMVA has been working with OSRoads and the EU, and EREG is part of the EU community, to promote and move MDL in this space. You can see on the right side of your screen, in the US and Canada, the purple colors are the states that have already adopted and are issuing MDLs today. And I want to make a point here that in order to be eligible for an MDL in any state or jurisdiction in North America, the person has to first come in person to get identified and get an identity created for them and get their physical card. That has to happen first in person. But we're right now working with these groups to promote and move MDL down the road. You heard Loffie talk about the VICAL inside of the ISO standard. This is an optional format to provide relying parties the public key certificates for the issuing authorities. AAMVA was well poised to provide this service, so we set off on a journey to provide the VICAL in North America. We're calling it the Digital Trust Service. It's the single point of trust for relying parties, as Loffie has already mentioned. And we envision similar trust points across the globe in other regions of the world, such as Australia, in Europe, Japan, and in Africa and other places, where those certificates can be regionalized and then shared across regions so that it's truly a globally interoperable solution. The way the DTS ensures interoperability, privacy, and security is we ensure that the jurisdictions who are issuing MDLs follow the ISO requirements and other guidelines that we put in place in North America for domestic use. It is free to relying parties to download that list of keys, and we intend to do our best to keep it at low cost as possible. The funding options are continuing to be evaluated in the US and in Canada to see what we can do to keep it subsidized, but we do hope and we're working toward keeping it free for relying parties. So how does this thing work? So Loffie's already really kind of said it. We collect all the keys from the issuing authorities who are issuing mDOCs. We then supply those to the relying parties through the list. They can download it from our website. But before we put it actually in the middle here in the VICAL, we check the certificate's origin and quality and practices to ensure that it's a true issuing authority, they're following best practices and requirements for the certificate itself, and that it's a good certificate. That's how you know, the relying party knows, to be able to trust it. We actually put them through a process to ensure that it's a good certificate. We are working, again, with international partners to increase the adoption across not just the US and Canada, but in other parts of the world. Many of the wallet providers, and especially the large wallet providers, actually support mDOC. You heard Adam talk about that earlier today. Apple, Google, Samsung, and the Open Wallet Foundation, which you also heard this morning, supports the mDOC service. It's already being used in one of the wallets from app-to-app services, on-device app-to-app services, and it is the leading digital credential use case. mDOC is the leading digital credential use case. For enrollment, again, as I said before, the person has to come in to an office in person to have their identity established prior to getting either the physical credential or the MDL. Subsequent MDL issuances do occur mostly remotely in the US and Canada, but it is a remote process after you've been there in person. The ecosystem risks are the same as a physical card failing or falling into the wrong hands. There are similar risks here for that. But the remote enrollment process allows the mDOC holder, the digital credential holder to do this remotely and not in an office, which helps speed up the process for getting that credential after the in-person solution. What happens is the wallet provider will obtain the customer details, including biometrics. They will match that with the IA, the issuing authority, the true record, to assure that the record has been established. And then the IA, the issuing authority, signs the MDL data and then allows the app provider to provision that into the wallet. So the issuing authority remains the responsible party for signing the data.
So where do we go from here? There are quite a few very interesting developments and challenges in this area. The first one is the idea of public key infrastructure as a service. There's a very interesting pilot about to start in Australia, administered by Austroads, their version of AAMVA, if you would, where they will provide a service to smaller and states or areas, issuing authorities that don't have necessarily the technical ability to do it themselves, to provide the PKI that they need to issue credentials. So that's a very interesting concept, which I believe could be a very interesting topic for further discussion in Africa as well. I mentioned at the beginning that the standards group started and focused on the in-person presentation, realizing that the over-the-internet presentation needs to be addressed. That is happening. There's a new version of 1813 Part 7, which is being prepared for a final round of ballot as we speak, that addresses over-the-internet presentation of your credential. And we're also very cognizant of work in the browser community that would allow presentation over the internet, and we're certainly following that with the eye of, when it becomes mature, incorporating that into the ISO standard as well. On-device holder authentication is perhaps the holy grail of identity over the internet. This requires the device, and by device I mean the combination of the hardware, the operating system, and the wallet, to, in a trustworthy manner, at transaction time, confirm the identity of the holder, and then only share with a relying party one attribute, say the person that is handing you this data is over 21, without sharing the portrait image. The relying party would not be responsible for making the match between the presenter and the data anymore. It's a very challenging thing to do, and it's very challenging to do it in a way such that an issuing authority can trust that it will happen correctly at transaction time. So that's a very big challenge that is still facing us. We're very serious about protecting customer data after it's been released. I think we're quite good at protecting customer data before it's being released right now, but after release, it's sort of the Wild West. It's a problem we already have with the physical credentials today. And we do not necessarily always have cross-jurisdictional regulatory protections. So what do we do to help protect customer data in those cases? A last note is that physical cards will remain with us for quite some time, because the penetration of the MDL, or the digital credential itself, will take time, and because the reader infrastructure will take time. And in North America, there are even some that say, I will always want to have my physical card because I don't trust the government, which is sort of an interesting thought, but bottom line is the physical cards will be with us for quite some time. We know that adoption is the key to success. So we're focusing very hard on increasing adoption by holders, by issuers, and by relying parties. And we've got separate initiatives in our world to help increase adoption, but we realize that that is where the success of all this lies. And with that...
Yeah. Let's take a few minutes to section. Please be seated. Okay, Slido is open, so if you want to participate in the Q&A, we'll be happy to take your questions. I want to start warming it up a little bit by raising the issue. If the identity authorities present in this room want to future-proof their credential, would you tell them, go ahead, and even though you may not have an mDOC strategy yet, it's not a bad credential format to be issuing and even putting on a regular smart card that's being issued. What's the wrong thinking in this? I mean, is this a wise thing to do?
So, short answer is yes. I think the mDOC being an extension of the current 18013 set of standards is important. And that data being signed and authorized by the issuing authority is also important. And the mDOC being a stack that is all in one box, in one package available to you is a good way to progress in providing your citizens and your people with a solution that you control as an issuing authority, but it's also up to it also gives your customer the ability to have selective data release and be protected.
But is there a downside? I mean, are you compromising something by sticking with the mDOC, future-proofing yourself, but starting now?
So, in my mind, there's no such thing as fully future-proofing. Things change over time. You want to minimize the risk of something changing sooner than you expect, because things will change. Standards evolve. And as they evolve, issuing authorities have to adapt and adopt and keep moving with it. So in my mind, one of the points made yesterday, one of the vendors said they chose the standard because of market demand. And I think that is an indication that for an issuing authority, if you want to minimize your risk, see what is happening elsewhere and try to go with that, realizing that at some point it is going to change again and you will have to do something else.
I understand, Loffie, but today we have to make decisions. They are sitting in this room and they're trying to make decision, what is the credential strategy that I should have, knowing that in 3 years, 4 years, they may change it. But what would you say today? Is mDOC a good thing for them to follow or not?
We believe it is, yes, at this point.
Okay. I believe it is, because to me, future-proof meaning proofing it for the next few years. I mean, the future is so fast approaching. So, okay, so thank you. So for the identity authorities that you keep asking the question, I tell you, mDOC is the only ISO standard that I really like, because it does work in a physical context and it does work in the cyber context when you begin to bring in the -7 element of it. What's the timeline for that?
It is being editorially reviewed by ISO at this point. I expect it to be published for ballot, July timeframe, for a 8-week ballot. And after that, we just have to process the results, so before the end of the year.
Okay, so one takeaway from them is that there is an ISO standard for mDOC. ISO is an important framework. If we all try to make our work become ISO one day, then it's easier for the entire world to reach interoperability. But one thing also you tantalized us with, and it is coming from the questions, and I hear it a lot, is how do we make PKI accessible to all? Does that mean PKI as a service is your response to this?
Well, you need PKI to be successful operationally, right? The technical stuff is there, but you need a place to help you sign, and you need the DTS part to make it operationally work. The PKI as a service is a means to help issuing authorities that are concerned with some of the technical things they have to do to issue an MDL. So it's really an aid to that.
Exactly. So basically, I hear a lot of complaints from countries saying any approach that requires PKI becomes complex for us because it is a technically complex solution, and we feel it's a point of failure. How would that work in Africa? Would you think there will be some trusted body that would create a regional PKI as a service, or will the private sector offering it to the government in each country?
To be decided. That's the interesting part of the pilot they're running in Australia, is to see how this works and what the contractual avenues could be to actually make it a reality. So I think it's to be decided. I would expect that it could be either of those models.
Okay. Just one last question from here, and then we'll continue with the third, and then if we have more time at the end, we answer some. Will MDL and W3C VC meet one day?
It would be great if we don't have both. I believe at this point, both have their place. They do pretty much the same thing in slightly different ways. Mm-hmm. Whether they meet or not, I think remains to be seen, because as I said, I think there's applicability of both depending on the circumstances.
And this is a great segue into the third segment. So we hope to hear more about verifiable credentials. So I'll ask who's going to start first? Yes, Damien, please. Welcome to the stage, to the podium, and from policy to reality. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm actually going to sit down as quickly as possible and hand over to my colleagues, Anand and Catherine, because they have the real-world experience of implementing verifiable credentials, which I'm sure that everyone is very keen to hear more about. But just before I do that, I want to set the scene and just provide a brief explanation of W3C verifiable credentials. So I'm Damien Glover. I'm Director of Communications for the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and I'll let Anand and Catherine introduce themselves shortly. So VCs are digital files containing verifiable claims about a subject. As we've heard, they include a cryptographic proof that's created by the issuer. That helps to make them tamper evident. They are also secure, private, and convenient. And finally, they are portable and reusable, just like physical credentials, as you can see here in this wallet. So it's the same idea. We've heard about digital wallets, and I'll just add a few points shortly about how those attributes are achieved. This diagram by now is probably looking quite familiar. So we've just heard, or we've just seen a very similar sort of diagram in the ISO MDL example. So the point here is that verifiable credentials digitize the three-party identity model. And the three-party model is actually very well established, as you can see from the diagram on the left-hand side of the screen. The key innovation of verifiable credentials and wallets is to enable this same model to be transferred online. And the key thing here is that the holder interacts directly with the verifier, just like in the picture. And really what fundamentally enables that is cryptography. So VC standards are developed and maintained by global open standards communities. The picture here is of the sort of meeting a couple of years ago of the W3C credentials community group. And the role of that group is to provide feedback from the market in terms of requirements and also sort of feedback on actual implementation learnings. The logos you see around the edge are just examples of some of the organizations that have participated in the development of the W3C credential standards. W3C hosts and maintains the VCDM, so Verifiable Credential Data Model Standard, but there are other organizations involved in the standardization process. So obviously ISO has its own standard that we've just been hearing about. OpenID Foundation is a key part of the W3C credential sort of infrastructure, and there are other organizations as well. One interesting point actually that Adam raised in his presentation was around data interoperability. And that is a kind of probably one of the sort of remaining development areas, really, in this space. So there are obviously defined credential formats, but for some of the newer uses of credentials, those data schemas still need to be defined. And that's where Decentralized Identity Foundation is doing some work in our credentials group to help to define some of the newer standards for the data interoperability. So VCs are secure, user-controlled, privacy-preserving, and scalable. And I think the key takeaway here, so this is just a little comparison of some of the attributes of typical EID scheme compared with verifiable credentials. The key takeaway is that verifiable credentials help to make it easier to meet privacy and data security requirements. That doesn't mean that this can't be achieved by EIDs, but VCs enable you to leverage standard wallet functions and protocols to do this at scale, without the need for IAM or verification infrastructure. And this can then release big cost savings, as we heard, for example, from Mark Sullivan yesterday at CBN. So I think what's sort of most immediately relevant to the delegates here is that VCs enable government-issued IDs to be combined with decentralized authentication and use. And that's exactly what's happening in Bhutan, as you're about to hear. But also, verifiable credentials are not just about identity. And again, as we've heard this morning already, there's all sorts of different credentials that are possible using this model. And we're going to hear about some of those other uses in both from Bhutan and also Thailand. As with any new technology, there are some potential challenges. So there are some new technical elements involved, and there are also some implementation choices around those technical elements. But the important thing here is that these elements integrate with what already exists, as Joseph alluded to in his introduction. So this is not about rip and replace. This is about building additional capabilities on top of your infrastructure that actually makes it more valuable. The other sort of area of challenge that I just want to flag is around adoption. So the kind of concept of having your own digital credentials and managing those in a wallet is new. And one of the, I think, probably consistent learnings from all of the places where verifiable credentials have been implemented is that user education and support are absolutely critical to sort of support that adoption. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Anand.
Good morning, and thank you, IT for Africa, for having us here to share our journey. So as you see, Bhutan is a landlocked country, and we are in between Bhutan, India, and China, and we are roughly like a 700,000 population. So if you look into the map, you can see our terrain is full of mountains, and we are a very sparsely populated country. Now, this strains our resources, and we need to be, like, it's difficult for us to be efficient with the services that we provide to our citizens. So sometimes the citizens has to travel long ways just to get basic common services. And in order to counter that, we actually tried digital transformation in 2019. So this transformation is called a digital Drukgyal, in which we want to digitalize all the processes, and National Digital Identity Project is the flagship project based on which we aim to give more services via digitalization of all the services. So Bhutan NDI actually is the project that is this National Digital Identity, and I'm one of the project managers who is handling the part of this project. So this is just a overview, brief overview and high-level overview of our architecture. So we have adopted the SSI philosophy, and we have also deployed decentralized technology in order to achieve our digital identity. The source of truth in here, if you see there, is the foundational issuers, which basically we issue the digital ID based on our Department of Civil Registration for all the citizens of Bhutan, and we have also extended the foundational ID for foreigners via our Department of Immigration. So the verifiable credentials that we issue when you onboard at the beginning is the foundational ID, and pegged with that for citizens of Bhutan is their permanent address, and for foreigners who are onboarding, we actually give them their visa through which they have applied to come to Bhutan. And we have also integrated with other issuer and verifiers like Bank of Bhutan banks and universities and government agencies and telcos in order to give further based on the foundational ID, we give VCs like your telephone numbers, your bank accounts, and your employment cards. So we have used the W3C standards, and we have also used the formats of anon crates in order to give this VC. Of course, getting the product done is one part of the stories, but onboarding and educating the users are the challenges that we face the most. So in order to get to those, in order to overcome those challenges, we use the social media campaign, broadcast media, print media, and we also have set up a help desk in order to help the people in real time when they onboard. Most of our users are actually rural based, and we have enlisted the Bhutan's national volunteer group called DESUPS. So if you see in the pictures, they are actually going door to door to help the people on board. So we have been trying all medium and mechanism possible to help people on board. And from the end of last year, when we went on production, we have onboarded 1/7 of the population to this day. So currently we are providing services like passwordless login, eKYC, and also verifiable credentials as our primary services. So these are the benefits that we actually go about publishing to whoever integration partner we are trying to integrate with. And Bhutan NDI is actually built with privacy and security as a first policy. And in our VCs and the ecosystem of Bhutan NDI, we are actually providing selective disclosure, consent-based sharing of data. So to complement this and also to legalize all the data and the VCs that we are providing to the users, Bhutan NDI Act was passed in 2023, so which made it legal for all the data, and also it legitimized all the activities done through Bhutan NDI wallet and the ecosystem. So in current date and time, we are actually onboarding lots of companies, organizations, which actually we are giving free of cost to all the companies that wants to integrate with Bhutan NDI within Bhutan. And we are bearing the cost for their infrastructure for now, because our aim is to onboard as much as organization as possible, because without the use case, even if we onboard the users, it seems to be futile. So that's our aim, to onboard as much as organization free of cost and to build use cases. So the limitation right now is that since we have taken the decentralized approach, so it's quite difficult for the organization which are used to the legacy systems and also used to the centralized system. So most of the effort actually goes on creating this technical stack in which all our stakeholders are comfortable and they get gist of what we are actually trying to do very fast. So most of our effort is actually invested in trying to convince people to work in decentralized method, which I hope we are getting there sooner than later. Yeah, so the key takeaway here is that we have our legislation and our government who is actually supporting us by passing the right acts and laws that help us build trust among all our stakeholders. And also, like I mentioned before, that use cases, we need to build more use cases so that more users can adopt our system. And also, we need to future-proof all the technologies that we are adopting. So that's why we adopted the decentralized approach, because we thought that's the way forward for the digital identity project. We actually started with a centralized project before we pivoted to the decentralized approach, and it's our firm belief that decentralized approach is something that will take us a long way. So yeah, that's a brief narrative of our project, and if anyone wants to talk, you can always approach me and we can talk more on this later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Sawadika to my Thai colleagues here. As previously introduced by Damien, my name is Catherine, and I'm on the steering committee for the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and I oversee the global business development initiatives at Finema Company Limited, which is a Thai-based company, but I'm Ugandan residing in Bangkok, Thailand. So as previously discussed, I believe you're familiar with what verifiable credentials are, and you've seen the implementation and integration to existing government use cases on a national scale. But for Thailand, it took a different sort of approach. So we started off on a small scale by actually using the top-bottom approach, where we kind of witnessed what is going on in the Western world, having to jump on calls at midnight and all to see what's going on in the EU, in the US, and then trying to create awareness with the Thai government to see how we can adopt and also customize to what was going on in Thailand. So after 5 years of education and awareness, in 2022, the Electronic Transactions Development Agency, which is an agency in Thailand that oversees the standards, policies, recommendations for electronic transactions, sort of issued a recommendation regarding data structure of verifiable credentials and presentations according to the W3C data model 1. So that one was issued in Thai language, so it created a foundation or something that we could use to kind of develop use cases regarding verifiable credentials. And I believe that this is the right approach, because with the government, they will always have to have a policy or a standard in place that they can refer to later on develop different technologies. So little did we know that in 2022, we experienced the pandemic, COVID-19, as many countries were locking down because tourism is the largest contributor of the Thailand economy, so we had to find ways of not closing, but also preventing the reintroduction of COVID, as well as ensuring safety. So that led to Thailand Pass. As you see in the photos, it was a verification platform whereby whoever was coming to Thailand by air transport, you had to upload your vaccination credentials, your hotel booking, and insurance coverage. So if you didn't have those three and also other additional requirements, you would not be able to enter to Thailand. So that kind of led to the introduction of verifiable credentials in Thailand. So along the way from Thailand Pass, because it was short-lived, I think in 2022, midway, there was no need for sort of vaccination credentials anymore, because most people were vaccinated and countries had to come up and start business again. So that sort of led to an end of Thailand Pass, and then it led to the birth of the Thai Health Pass. So what happens on Thai Health Pass, it's similar to the Thailand Pass, but this time it's focusing more on the yellow fever vaccination credentials. So these ones are required for people coming from the yellow fever belt, especially Africa and South America, whereby you have to carry your yellow fever vaccine card to Thailand, and then the Port of Health will check and then verify that. Then after that, you can proceed to immigration. So we are trying to kind of like digitize that, in that before you come to Thailand, you should take a photo of your yellow fever vaccination card and then your passport, and then fill in the date of entry and all. Then after 1 to 2 days, you get the QR code, and then you just have to like print that out or save it on your phone, and then you come to Thailand. But because that is addressing a small section, the government has really enjoyed this digitization. So right now we are working on that Thai electronic travel authorization platform, which we think will streamline the tourism industry in Thailand. So we envision it as a single platform where you will be able to apply for your Thai health pass, Thai e-visa, later on incorporating the insurance policies. You can buy the insurance cover before you come to Thailand, eSIM card. So it's going to be like a one-stop center for everything that you would need when coming to Thailand. So this is the work in progress right now. And as you see, it's been an evolution from Thailand Pass to Thai Health Pass, and then Thai ETA platform. Yeah, for the user education from our side, it was quite obvious because we used the top-bottom approach. The government was fully involved in this, so it issued policies, it informed embassies, airlines, press release, like it was everywhere. It was a requirement that before you come to Thailand, you need to apply for the Thailand Pass. So it was quite smooth for us. We didn't really incur so much of costs in creating awareness and all, because it was a visa requirement. So that was our journey. It was all over media, YouTube, social media, and what have you. Then for the benefits, obviously right now we are focusing on the Thai ETA platform. We are creating e-registration portals to streamline the tourist industry in Thailand, and then it's giving our tourists convenience, because right now it's clear you don't have to go back and forth to the embassies and all those things, and then better user experience. And the dream goal would be paperless, but obviously as you've heard from previous speakers, it's just a vision, and we are planning to go paperless soon as well. And you see that the ETA platforms are already taking place, so I urge you that in case you're interested, please jump on board so that we can all have the same experience while going to these different countries in the world. Obviously, with everything, there will always be some limitations and costs. On our side, there is a cost of operation by the government, and then sort of the COVID-19 accelerated the adoption, but also it was a short timeline for development and integration. There will be sort of like unstable healthcare policies, because at that time, the countries didn't know which vaccines to accept, how many doses, and then what's the schema for the vaccine credential in this country and in this country. So it was sort of a limitation on us, but then later on it got better, obviously with the help of government-to-government relations. The key takeaways from our side, basically, if you want to start, best to start small, because sometimes it's less costly when you start small, and then you're able to know how to mitigate certain risks. And then later on, you should also encourage inclusion. Whatever you're going to take on, as previously discussed from previous speakers, make sure that you don't have vendor lock-in. Try to utilize open standards, and in cases where in some countries the smartphone adoption is not that wide, try to find other options. Now, like you see in that photo, people had to print the QR code on their t-shirts. It was really overwhelming, and it was exciting to see that people are coming up with ways. You could save your QR code on your phone, you could print it out, so you didn't really need a smartphone to be able to use this kind of technology. Then also you can scale gradually. You can start from maybe healthcare and then education and then maybe something else later on, because in this way you are bound to make less mistakes, and then it's also easier to implement. So these are some of the key takeaways that we can adopt, because I believe this is coming from the West, then Asia, and then Africa. But it depends on how fast you are, how aggressive you are, and that's why we are inviting you to join us at Stand 807 to be part of the Decentralized Identity Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization where we come together to kind of like work on standards such as the W3C Verifiable Credential Data Model 1. We jump on calls every now and then to see how to like work together. So if you're out there interested, we shall be at Stand 807, and we welcome any questions and collaboration where possible. Thank you very much.
Let us put up Slido. We'll take a few questions that are specific to the third segment, and then, of course, in the remaining time, we'll try to address the entire panel. The first thing is, isn't the Verifiable Data Registry also a centralized data bank? Maybe we should clarify that issue. Damien?
The answer to that is that there are different ways of implementing the Verifiable Data Registry. So yes, it is possible to do that as via a centralized database, but clearly that's not optimal because that reintroduces a potential single point of failure. So one alternative solution is to use blockchain. So for example, to register the public keys of issuers. And there are other methods for enabling those public keys to be discovered and accessed. So there's no one single solution to this, and it very much depends on the kind of constraints and context of the country implementing this.
But remind the audience, what type of data is in the Verifiable Data Registry?
So I think the key information is the certificates of the public keys of the issuers, very similar to what we heard from ISO. But also a trust list of which issuers are trusted by that ecosystem to issue which credentials. So the DIF is actually developing different approaches to this. We've got a specification called Credential Trust Establishment that basically is another way for the wallet to basically check that the relying party to check that the issuer of a credential is trusted by the ecosystem.
Okay, but in terms of the nature of the data that's being stored, is there any concern that it would be in a centralized database if that is the choice of the government?
I mean, it is a choice, but clearly we're not talking about personal data here at all. We're talking about PKI certificates and
yeah, exactly.
Lists of, yeah.
So that's why I wanted you to clarify this point. Okay, Bhutan, is there a physical ID document today in your country, or is the DID approach a greenfield exercise?
Yeah, we still have the physical ID, and in fact, so this DID or the verifiable credentials that we have is like I said, the Act has legalized in the digital sphere. Is something that the service cannot be denied if someone shares that identity through the digital sphere. But we still have the physical ID. So as long as a person's data is in our civil registrations database, they can get the VC, and those can be used in the digital sphere for all the transactions that is legalized through the Act.
But what is the characteristic of the physical ID? This is an actual smart card ID system, or is it just a traditional?
It's just a normal traditional card that we have.
It's not a biometric?
No.
Is it linked to civil registration? Is your national identity linked to civil registration?
Yes. So all the data, person's data, if there is in the civil registration database, then they get those IDs. But and then that also gives us the access to the national digital identity. That's for the digital VCs, foundational IDs.
Somebody asked the question, it may not be relevant to this panel, but I'd like to raise it because it's an important question, and anybody would feel free. The question in French is, dans mon pays, nous avons lancé l'identité numérique sans avoir eu préalable au fichier d'état civil fiable. Devons-nous tout reprendre à zero? So I'll just quickly translate. In my country, we have launched the digital identity without having the trusted civil registration database. Are we supposed to start from zero? Basically. I know this is not a question for this panel in a way, but I would say in reality, at what time you link the national ID to the civil registration is a matter of resources, a matter of planning, a matter of strategy. But in my opinion, you don't restart from zero. Identity linkage to its origin takes a lot of different pathways. So in my opinion, I will say, no, you don't have to throw away your digital identity, but maybe Bhutan, you can say if you started automatically from the beginning with the linkage.
So, like I explained in my slides, our digital transformation started in 2019, but the Bhutan NDI project started only on 2021. So we actually started with collecting the biometric and making the centralized database clean and deduplicated all the data before we started the project. So we actually went ahead and collected the biometric and re-sensitized all the data before we began. So that was the approach we took. So I don't know.
Okay, I know Adam wants to contribute to an opinion on this issue. So Adam, what do you think?
Just to offer a slightly different slant on
Yes.
the whole identity question. So I come from a country where we don't have a national identity. There is no database that records all citizens of the UK. We have multiple databases. Some people are recorded in passports. We have civil registration for births. But even that is fragmented. There is not one single register where all of the births are recorded electronically, for example. So how do we deal with proving who people are in the UK? We created a standard for being able to do that from multiple different proofs. So when you're proving somebody's identity, what you actually want them to do is produce evidence of who they are. And you can produce multiple different types of evidence from different sources. So I could produce my birth certificate, which is a piece of paper. I could produce a passport, which I gained from a face-to-face interaction with a trained officer who issued me that document. I could produce all kinds of different things that I have about my person that are issued by government or local government. And you can take then a calculated view based on those different types of evidence and their strength as to whether or not the probability is that I am who I claim to be. And that's how we managed to do that in the UK. We are strange like that. We don't have a national register. So you don't actually have to start from zero. You can start with what you have, and combine them based on standards. And it's not just my country that's come up with these standards. My friends in NIST in the US came up with 863A, which also shows how you can do this without having a single national database, because there is no national ID in the US either. But there is state-based.
That's a good perspective. I want to give a question to Thailand. It's very specific. People would like to know, how do you convert your paper yellow fever certificate to a verifiable credential? So I am coming to your country, I've got a yellow certificate. How would you do it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Actually, for Thailand, as a country, we don't really issue yellow fever vaccination credentials. But I think the question made to be, how do we convert the paper-based yellow vaccination credentials for the tourists coming to Thailand? Okay, so that context, not yet, but what happens is the tourist or that person coming to Thailand will take a photo of their yellow fever card, and then back end, the government official who receives that photo will check and see that this yellow fever vaccination credential is still valid and it has been issued by probably the Ministry of Health for that country where the person is coming from. And then once everything is verified, that used to be actually verified upon arrival, that officer will issue sort of like a QR code that shows that this yellow fever vaccination credential has been checked and it's okay. So that QR code will be sent to the tourist's email address, and then the tourist will print that out and come to Thailand. But we do not issue yellow fever vaccination credentials. But if we were, then that would be the proper question, that how do we convert that to verifiable credentials?
Let me take a question now from Slido on the MDL, to the MDL team, to AAMVA. The question says, how does the interface accommodate physical presence at times of renewal to rule out fraudulent or false transactions when true license holder is dead?
So that's interesting, and I think there are two parts to that question. When someone dies, the issuing authority has a responsibility to effectively cancel that credential.
But who notifies them?
So the normal way in which they cancel the record, because it's the digital presentation of that record is just that. The base record is the one that needs to be cancelled when a person dies, because it affects the physical credential and many other things as well. So that's the first part to it. If someone dies, the issuing authority, as soon as they know, they will cancel the credential, and of course in the digital case that can happen immediately. The other part to point out is that on the relying party side, when a credential is being used, the relying party has the responsibility to match the person presenting it to the portrait image on the credential. And so if someone has died, it means such use would be unauthorized and someone trying to look like the person on the portrait image, which already is a challenge even for physical credentials today.
Yeah, I mean, in most agencies that I'm aware of, when I go to renew my driver's license, they do a match my live image against what they have in the database. If somebody else tries to impersonate me, they will say, you're not so-and-so. So you do need a binding of the live person against the record or what's linked to the credential. Okay, there are quite a few questions here which are sort of a little bit fragmented. I want to try to rise above because we only have a few minutes left. I wanted each panelist to participate in this and basically ask the question, we are looking at an intermediate state of development. In most African countries, no one is starting from zero. There are assets, they have different levels of coverage of those assets and different levels of sophistication of those assets. But nevertheless, this is what we've got, and so we have to work with them. Now, under what circumstances do you feel these type of advanced credentials make sense, leveraging the current and existing assets? Can they be integrated without disrupting the existing ecosystem so that it's an add-on that offers people more options? So give me a sense. I'll start with you, Adam. Give me a sense of how wallets and verifiable credentials and MDLs and et cetera can take the current identity authority systems to the next level.
So one of the key ingredients to any digital identity is a strong physical and identity.
Foundational.
So a foundational, absolutely the right word, foundational identity. But it doesn't mean that you have to have 100% coverage, and it doesn't mean that that physical credential has to be perfect. It's something that you're using now, today. If it's acceptable for that identity to be used in transactions right now in the physical world, why should it not be acceptable in the digital world? So you do need to think about, are there limitations of that foundational identity? Do we need to improve it? Yes, always. But more often than not, if you're using it in the physical world, there's no reason why you shouldn't use it in the digital world. So I would not prevent going to the digital level now and having that complementary, it's always complementary. This is not replacing the physical world at all. That complementary digital twin that can be used by some people very effectively to get access to services better than they would have done before.
Let's switch it a little bit for Ramesh. Ramesh, how would you suggest the fastest and easiest way for countries that already have have a foundational identity system to launch into a wallet-based twin?
Yeah, that's fairly straightforward. All we need is to add the support for them to create a simple digital credential and make it available through as many means as possible. So for
people
example,
download it then?
yes, they can download it in the piece of
You can push it to
physical
them.
format with a QR code which can be digitally consumed. So physical format, or as a wallet where they can actually hold the credential, or if they don't have access to these, there are portals that can be set up through which they can just log in through kiosks or whatever browsing centers or their own PCs, and then they can be part of these transactions.
So let me go step by step. First step, my citizens can download a wallet into their iPhone or in the Google phone. Step one, right?
Right.
Then that will ask me to activate my credential. When I activate this...
Yes, so we bind the wallet to the individual by downloading
the
credential, an identity credential,
now,
which is backed by the existing ID.
How do I ensure that Adam has not taken my credential into his wallet?
So as part of this, we do something similar to a KYC process. We verify the credentials belong to the person who is actually downloading. This could even include a verification of the face.
Or one-time password.
Or password, or OTP on a phone. These are mechanisms available. Based on what you know, based on what you possess, is also possible.
So it's pretty simple. I mean, it's an app that sits on your phone. It's called the wallet. Most of us have it already. We use it in the financial sector from Apple and Google. And then we just retrieve our credential, verify it, bind it to us, and there you go, right?
Exactly. So this is similar to what we are doing in Cambodia, where their existing ID, with the help of our e-signet module, which allows them to access and download these credentials onto a wallet, as well as use it digitally online for access. We are enabling this.
Okay. Let me go to the mDOC team from AAMVA and ask you, what do you recommend to identity authorities to take advantage of what mDOC can enrich their existing ecosystem, identity ecosystem? What should they do now?
So each of you now have a base record, and we experienced a lot of this same issue of different systems in different places with different rules in the US and Canada. Not all systems are alike in the US and Canada. But what you can take advantage of today is find a solution that causes you to make the least decisions about implementation. The decision making can be taken off of your shoulders so that you can concentrate on how you provision those credentials to your users. And in the mDOC solution, the decisions have been made for you about data model, transfer protocol, and the signatures that are required for the data. So you can concentrate on what you need to do to sign that data and allow the wallet providers, as you have just described, to help you get those credentials that you signed into the wallet. So it doesn't matter where your system sits today, you still have that record. You just have to implement the signature process, the PKI process, which those decisions for how you do that have been made in the standards, so that takes that off of your shoulders. So that would be my recommendation.
So as you have seen, so far, all of this is additive to what you have. Everything you've heard about wallets and about mDOC does not tell you go throw everything out and start over. No, it enhances what you've got. Let's do the same question. How does verifiable credentials add to the richness of the identity ecosystem? So maybe we can start with Damien, and then our colleagues can elaborate.
I think that the first point is that verifiable credentials are about much more than identity. So, and everyone here has been talking about this. So there are sort of numerous very useful pieces of information which can be attested electronically using verifiable credential, university degrees, vaccination certificates, etc. I think that's probably the first point. In terms of sort of how to integrate them within your existing identity infrastructure, sort of over time, I think it comes down to the lessons that Anand and Catherine referred to about sort of rolling out, starting small, rolling out use case by use case, perhaps geography by geography, you know, making it voluntary for citizens as the EU is doing, these kind of things.
And so, in fact, this is a great point. What you're seeing is, yes, you have your foundational system, but then look at use cases. For example, in Thailand, health, in Bhutan, the different use cases. So maybe in some cases it makes sense to use verifiable credentials. Verifiable credentials may not be necessarily needed for a foundational overall ecosystem, but for use cases by use cases, they may be actually wonderful. So I may have what I like to always call the digital multiplicity of unique identity. So the digital multiplicity, I could have many different credentials, but they are all attesting about a certain aspect of who I am, but also maybe a certain aspect of what I'm entitled to do. And the health is a perfect example. Actually, we ran out of time, but Thailand and Bhutan, if you want to comment, please feel free very quickly.
Okay, yeah, so back to the question regarding probably Africa, we just need to use what we have right now, because when you look at the verifiable credentials, you might feel like maybe for high-risk use cases or maybe for like health credentials where privacies are concerned, where you need to actually ascertain the card whether it's valid or not valid, we can adopt verifiable credentials. But then when it comes to limitations like digital wallets and all those things, I believe that what we shared today, most government entities have had e-portals. So whoever goes to an e-portal, they have an email. So in this case, verifiable credentials can be sent to their email. And then there is also cloud wallets, whereby people don't really have to have phones. Cloud wallets, custodian wallets, it might be a little bit technical, but there are so many options in that you don't really have to have a phone. You can have it in your email, you can print it out, and also that can help with adoption. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, we ran out of time. So please join me in thanking the panel. I wish we had more time to discuss some more. But I also want to remind you, during this break, you have an hour till 11:30. Remember, there will be no exposition starting tomorrow. So if you have not visited the booths, please stop by, network, and interact with them. So once again, thank you very much. And I think while we're doing a photo, you have some announcements to make. Please make them in the interest of time.
Your break starts now, and we call on you once more to visit the Expo Center and make sure you enjoy all the refreshments courtesy of Mulboa. Thank you. And be back here sharp 11:30. Thank you.